So now we're going to begin section 3.4. This will be a new section. We did not cover this one in class. The concept that we want to deal with here is we want to talk about using a truth table to determine whether an argument is what we call valid or invalid. So we have three definitions that we need to understand before we can get started. The first definition is that of a logical argument. So a logical argument is a statement which claims a given set of premises leads to a specific conclusion. All right, we'll come back to that in just a minute when we look at our example. All right, and then we have definitions for a valid argument and for an invalid argument. So a valid argument is one that is a tautology. In other words, when we finish the problem and we finish our truth table, if everything is true, then we're going to say that the argument is valid. If everything is not true, so there's at least one false, we're going to say that the argument is invalid. Okay, so let me show you how this works with an example. So we're going to get started on this first one. The first thing that I need to do is I need to go through and I need to put these two premises and this conclusion, which we'll identify in just a second, in terms of P's and Q's. Okay, so I am going to start with this first statement right here. We're going to call this premise 1. And so I'm just going to retype it right here so we'll have it. So if the sky is blue, then the sun is shining. So that is premise 1. The second sentence we're going to call premise 2. The sky is blue. And the third sentence is going to be our conclusion. Okay, so every time we work a problem, that's how we're going to break this thing up. First sentence, first premise. Second sentence is the second premise, and the third sentence is the conclusion. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to assign a P and a Q value for these two premise statements and also for the conclusion. So I'm going to take the situation that I have, and I'm going to start with premise 1, and I'm going to say that P is going to be the sky is blue. Okay, and I'm just using that because that's the beginning of my first sentence. And then I'm going to say that Q is the second part of the first sentence. So the sun is shining. Now that I've decided that, I'm going to come back up here to these statements and I'm going to try to write them in terms of P and Q. So the first statement says, if the sky is blue, so that's the P, and we know that this is an if-then statement, so I'll do my arrow that points in one direction. Then the sun is shining, and we know that the sun is shining is the Q part. Okay, for premise 2, we have the sky is blue. So we know that if the sky is blue, that's just the P. So I'm just going to put a P there. All right, and then my conclusion is the sun is shining. That's the Q. So I'm just going to label that Q. Now I'm going to put these things together. Now the way that we're going to combine them is always the same. Okay, so from one example to the next, we're always going to do the same thing. We're going to take premise 1 and premise 2, and we're going to put an and symbol in between. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of scroll down. Maybe I'll pull that up. Okay, so here's what we've got. Get this up a little higher so we can see it. Okay, So this part, P arrow Q, that's this, P arrow Q. Okay, and then we have the and symbol in between, and then we have the P, which is right there. Okay, so make sure that that makes sense. We take the first premise and the second premise, we put them together and put an and in between, and we have that. Then we're going to do a double arrow, which is not one of our symbols that we've talked about before. This symbol just simply means implies. So we're going to say that that implies, and it's going to imply the conclusion. So if the conclusion up here is Q, you're going to see a Q right here. Okay, so now once that's done, once we get the argument written in symbols, we're going to go ahead and construct our truth table. So remember, and I've done part of this for us already, we've got the P column and we've got the Q column set up already. Remember that our first job is to construct the left-hand side, so we would want to start with doing a column for the part that's in the parentheses. That's here. Then we would want to combine that with the P column, so that would give us the entire left-hand side coming in right here. And then we combine it with the right-hand side. All right, so let's go ahead and do this truth table. All right, so the first thing I'm going to look at is P. If P, then Q. All right, so grab your handout that shows you the answers for these things, and let's go ahead and look at this. All right, so I'm going to copy underneath. So I'm first going to copy the P's. And then I'm going to put my arrow. And then I'm going to copy the Q underneath the Q. So TF, TF. Copy that over. And then we're going to come up with some answers. All right, so look at your handout and let's figure out what our answers are. So true, if true, then true. That is true. If true, then false. That's our false one. And remember, these last two are true. Okay, and then we're ready to move on to our next column. So our next column is going to take the answers to P arrow Q. So that's these numbers over here, these letters over here, the answers. So I'm going to write those down. TF, TT. TF, TT. Then I'm going to put my and symbol in. Okay, and then I'm going to go get the P's. So I'm going to copy the P's, TTFF. All right, let's figure out some answers for those. So again, go get your chart and let's look this up. True and true makes true. False and true makes false. True and false makes false. True and false makes false. All right, last column. We're going to copy what we just did. So these answers first, TFFF. And we're going to put our arrow. This is double arrow can just be interpreted as we work this problem out as a single arrow. That's fine. And then we're going to copy our Q's. So I'm going to come over here, get the Q column, and copy it right here. So TF, TF. And let's get our answers. So T, if T, then T, we know that that's true. We know that this one is true. I'm pulling this from my handout. This one is true, and this one is true. Okay, so remember that now we are looking at our final answers for the truth table. We note that they're all true, which means then that the argument is valid.